Hmm. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the next installment of my Spider-Man series. Today, I will be reviewing the extremely controversial and extremely disappointing second and final installment of the Mark Webb Spider-Man series, 2014's The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Oh boy. Let's jump right into this one. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was released May 2nd, 2014. Development of which began after the success of The Amazing Spider-Man, with the entire cast that survived, at least from the first film, returning for this. And it was received by very mixed reviews from critics and audiences, with praise for its special effects, chemistry between Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield, action sequences, and Hans Zimmer's musical score. And the script and running time received major criticism. Jamie Foxx's portrayal of Electro was highly polarizing, and it went on to gross $709 million worldwide against a $200 to $293 million budget. Although for some reason that's considered to be a financial failure. Despite being the ninth highest grossing film of 2014, it's the lowest grossing live action Spider-Man film to date. I don't think that's true. The Amazing Spider-Man series was originally intended to continue with at least two more sequels and several spin-offs, specifically one centered on Venom and one centered on the Sinister Six. However, due to the film's major mixed critical reviews and low box office performance, somehow, all subsequent installments of this new series were canceled. Both Andrew Garfield and Jamie Foxx would go on to reprise their roles in Spider-Man No Way Home, though. So you can see that as somewhat of a continuation. Man. Is that who that is? Oh, so that's who that is. Oh, I'll be damned. What the hell? What the hell has she been in? That's who it is. It's Jyn Erso from frickin' Rogue One. I more on that later, but oh fucking hell. Um. So let's talk about those canceled sequels and spin-offs before we get into this. Sony had originally intended the film to launch an expansive film universe around Spider-Man to compete with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Ah, geez. In 2013, Sony announced a third Amazing Spider-Man film with a release date of June 10th, 2016, with Alex Kurtzman, Roberto Orci, and Jeff Pinkner returning to write a fourth film with a release date of May 4th, 2018. The series was to include spin-off films featuring the Sinister Six and Venom, with Drew Goddard writing and directing the two-part The Amazing Spider-Man Sinister Six, and Kurtzman directing a Venom and Carnage script co-written by himself, Orci, and Ed Solomon. Sinister Six Part 1 had been planned for a November 11th, 2016 release. Additionally, by August 2014, Sony had hired Lisa Joy to write the script for a 2017 female lead film starring Felicia Hardy, or Black Cat. Sony announced plans for a spin-off based on Spider-Man 2099 to be released in late 2017. The character later appeared in the post-credit scene of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, voiced by Oscar Isaac. However, between December 2013 and the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in May 2014, Garfield and Webb stated that while they would return for the third film, neither was certain of their involvement in the fourth, with Webb confirming that he would not be directing. Following the very mixed critical reviews and franchise low box office performance of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, just rolls right off your tongue, the future of this series was left unclear. By July of 2014, Orci had left the third film to work on Star Trek Beyond from 2016. The Amazing Spider-Man 3, which would have included Chris Cooper returning as Norman Osborn and focused on Peter recovering from Gwen Stacy's death, was delayed to an unspecified date in 2018, and The Amazing Spider-Man 4 was moved to an unknown date. But following the 2014 Sony Pictures hack, Emma Stone was revealed to be in talks to return as a resurrected Stacy in the 2017 female-led film, and The Amazing Spider-Man 4 as the antagonist Carnage. Wow, that would have been different. Sony was then further revealed to be in talks to have Sam Raimi return to the franchise to direct a new trilogy for his version of the character, along with a Spider-Man versus the Amazing Spider-Man movie, and was in discussion with Marvel Studios about including Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe film Captain America: Civil War. Marvel was reportedly unhappy with some of the terms of the proposed arrangement, including the film rights staying with Sony, and both talks allegedly ceased. In early 2015, a deal between the studios that allows Spider-Man to be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe was reached, effectively canceling the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. Speaking to Amy Adams for Variety Actors on Actors YouTube series in 2016, Amy Adams being the actress who played, I believe, Lois Lane in the DC Extended Universe. In 2016, Andrew Garfield described himself as being left heartbroken by his experience on working on the Amazing Spider-Man films. Whew, Jesus Christ almighty. All right, so my personal history with the Amazing Spider-Man 2, similar to the first film, I just didn't care. I was not interested in seeing this movie. I was not wanting to see it whatsoever. I just did not have a care in the world regarding this series. Ooh, another Spider-Man movie that's not the Spider-Man that I want to see. I just don't care. I don't want to see this. But as stated yesterday, when Spider-Man Homecoming was coming out, Sony had re-released all previous Spider-Man movies with new and improved DVD sets. So I purchased the two Amazing Spider-Man movies, and I watched one after the other back to back on separate days. I liked the first movie. I was pleasantly surprised by the first movie. So I was pretty excited going into this. And the film started off strong, but by the end of it, I remember being depressed as fuck. I've seen this movie only twice. Once when I first bought it back in 2017, and once last night, not even 12 hours ago. Fuck me. I've seen a lot of people talk about some of the worst superhero films ever made. Fantastic from 2015, um, X-Men Origins Wolverine from 2009. Even though I defend that movie, I can see that it's pretty flawed. Um, Justice League. Um, Electra, Daredevil, Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer. Um, I've seen a lot of people list off what they think are some of the worst superhero movies ever made. And fairly often, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is brought up quite a lot. Now that I've seen it with a fresh mind, because admittedly last night, even though I remember not liking this movie back when I first saw it, I was a little excited to give it another chance. But about halfway through the movie this time, that's when I realized, nope, this movie still sucks. I've met only one person that does defend this film, that being Trevor Boy, but he's not around to give his opinion on why he defends this film, unfortunately. So I would have liked to hear what he would have had to say about this. But what do I think of The Amazing Spider-Man 2? It sucks. It sucks pretty damn hard. Despite the fact that there actually is quite a few good things about this movie, the negatives far outweigh the positives. This is not a great movie. It is not exactly one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I wouldn't even really say it's one of the worst um, superhero films I've ever seen. But wait, hang on. I definitely will say this is one of the most disappointing superhero films I've ever seen. In kind of two ways. One, just as a movie, but also two, what this movie was trying to lead into does sound kind of cool. But I'll talk about that later. I'll just say, man, what could have been sounded pretty damn cool, but it's just a shame that this movie flushed all of those down the shitter. So let's get into the plot of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. That really does just right off your tongue. Though, before we begin, a word from our sponsor. Diet Pepsi. Oscorp scientist Richard Parker records a video message to explain his disappearance. He and his wife Mary try to flee aboard a private jet that is hijacked by an assassin. The plane crashes, killing the couple. In the present day, 2 years after his battle with Dr. Kirk Connors, Richard and Mary's son Peter Parker continues to fight crime as Spider-Man and apprehends criminal Alexei Sistovich. Due to Peter's reservations about his relationship with his girlfriend Gwen Stacy, again played by Emma Stone, since making a vow to her late father to stay away from her, Gwen ends their relationship after their high school graduation. Peter's childhood friend, Harry Osborn, played by Dane DeHaan, returns to Manhattan to see his terminally ill father, Norman Osborn, CEO of Oscorp. The illness is genetic, and Harry is at the age where it first develops. Norman dies, and Harry is appointed the new CEO. While working in an Oscorp laboratory, Electrical engineer Max Dillon shocks himself by accident and falls into a tank of genetically engineered electric eels. They attack him, and he mutates into a living electric generator. Meanwhile, Gwen tells Peter that she may move to England if she earns a scholarship to Oxford University. Unaware of the extent of his power, Dillon wanders into Times Square, accidentally causing a blackout, and is stopped by Spider-Man. Dillon is taken to the Ravencroft Institute, which is pretty much Marvel's version of Arkham Asylum, where he is studied by German scientist Ashley Kafka, using the very, very cringy line, "Don't you know, I'm Electro." By the way, Max Dillon being played by Jamie Foxx. The first symptoms of Harry's illness start showing, and he uses information Norman gave him to deduce that Spider-Man's blood could save him. He asks Peter, who has been selling photos of Spider-Man to the Daily Bugle, to aid him in finding Spider-Man. Peter is unsure of what effects the transfusion would have and the possibility of Harry suffering a mutation similar to Dr. Kirk Connors. He later refuses Harry as Spider-Man, which angers Harry like a little punk bitch. Oscorp Vice President Donald Mencken frames Harry for Dillon's accident and removes him as CEO and takes control of Oscorp. Harry proposes a deal with Dillon, who now calls himself Electro, to get back inside the Oscorp building. Dillon agrees and kills Dr. Kafka. There, Harry finds the venom from the now destroyed genetically altered spiders. However, after he forces Mencken to inject him with the venom, it accelerates his illness and transforms him into the Green Goblin. But the built-in emergency protocol in Norman's suit of armor restores his health. Peter finds his father's secret lab in an abandoned subway station and learns that Richard had to flee because he refused to cooperate with Norman's plans to make biogenetic weapons with his research. Peter then discovers that Gwen was offered the Oxford scholarship. He professes his love to her, and they agree to go to England together. Electro causes another blackout, and together Peter and Gwen restore power and overload Electro's body, anticlimactically killing him. But then Harry arrives, equipped with Norman's weaponry as the Green Goblin, and upon seeing Gwen, he deduces Spider-Man's secret identity as Peter Parker, and swearing revenge for being refused the blood transfusion, takes her to the top of a clock tower. Peter manages to subdue Harry, but Gwen falls down the tower and dies. Guilt-ridden and depressed over Gwen's death, Peter ends his career as Spider-Man. 5 months later, Harry is incarcerated at Ravencroft. His associate, Gustav Fiers, a.k.a. the Gentleman, visits him, and the pair discusses forming their own team, the Sinister Six. Harry orders Fiers to start with Sistovich, breaking him out of prison, and equipped with a suit of armor, Sistovich dubs himself the Rhino and rampages through the streets. Peter, inspired by Gwen's graduation speech, confronts him as Spider-Man, ending the movie on one of the biggest bullshit sequel teases for an ending I've ever fucking seen in my entire life. Holy fuck. What do I think of this plot? Man, people talk shit about Spider-Man 3 having a very busy plot. This movie has somehow an even busier plot, but somehow it's also boring. And it's just plastered with poor decisions left and right, and misguided decisions left and right. And I can't really talk about the plot without talking about pros and cons, so let me just get into that. Despite me not really liking this movie very much, I do actually have quite a few pros. I have 7 pros. Pro number 1 is that this movie is pretty colorful. There's lots of vibrant reds and blues and greens all throughout the film. This movie had a pretty damn big budget, and it does show. And call it simple and kind of minor, but I do like it when movies are colorful. It is fun and pretty to look at. That's admittedly one big reason why I love Aquaman so much. Aquaman 2018, that is, because the movie is so colorful. And this movie is certainly similar. Pro number 2 is that there's a lot of really good slow-mo shots. Stuff getting destroyed, the movie will slow down and show the extent of whatever's being destroyed, and there's particles and sparks and fire and dust and smoke slowly spreading all over the place. When Gwen falls to her death, that's a good slow-mo shot. When Spider-Man saves a whole bunch of people with his web shooters from being electrocuted, that's a really good slow-mo shot. There's quite a few scenes where Spider-Man is swinging from building to building, either chasing Electro, or there's one slow-mo where he's chasing Green Goblin. They're all really fun to look at. The effects on them are done well. More on that later. They're just fun to look at, and they're cool. Well, no, I almost want to say this might be a short review, but I don't think so because I have a lot of bad things to say about this. Pro number 3 is the spider suit. Spider-Man's suit in this movie looks pretty damn awesome. Just looks like that. But it looks really good. It's very, very comic accurate. This is the one Spider-Man suit of all Spider-Man versions or variants of the spider suit throughout the series that has the biggest eyes, and that's the most comic accurate thing to the comics. The Spider-Man's eyes are pretty big. This also might be the most simple Spider-Man suit that there is. The original one's pretty simple too, but this one also looks pretty similar to the original Spider suit from the Tobey movies. But it looks great. Not much to say about it, but I really like the look of the Spider suit in this movie. Admittedly, some of my pros are pretty petty and minor, but I was kind of grasping at straws with this film. Pro number 4 is there's some good funny bits. A lot of the humor is kind of slapsticky and a bit goofy, but there are some funny lines throughout here. Fuck, I kind of can't think of any right now. The funniest scene in the movie, though, this isn't a line, but it is a goofy scene. When Peter is trying to figure out how to... Okay. When Peter's trying to figure out how to modify his web shooters to not get fried by intense electricity, he's got like 4 or 5 different attempts, but eventually he turns up the voltage and he attaches it to his shooter that's so strong it sends him flying and he goes crashing into a wall, and the strand of web that he has catches fire, and he goes, ah! he, he grabs a fire extinguisher, he puts out the fire, and then his web shooter, no, it's a battery that exploded, it starts sparking, so he sprays it with his fire extinguisher, then he stops. It's kind of goofy and it's kind of ridiculous, but that was a legitimately funny scene. There's another kind of funny scene too when Spider-Man's going around saving people. There's one scene when Peter is caught a cold and he's at like a gas station or a pharmacy, and there's a dude that comes in with the guns trying to rob the place. So he quickly puts on his spider suit as well as his hat and jacket over his suit. He webs the dude up on the store's wall, and the cashier's like, "You're Spider-Man!" And then because Peter has a cold under his suit, he's like, "I'm Spider-Man." What? I'm Spider-Man. And then he leaves. He's sick and nauseous and and gross, and leaves the studio. The cashier just standing there flabbergasted, like, "Wow, that was Spider-Man." That was kind of funny. But there are some good humorous moments throughout the film. Well, not throughout the film. Mostly in the first half. Pro number 5 is the music score. I believe this might be the very first movie that I've ever reviewed where its music was done by Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer, of course, is probably the most famous film composer that lives nowadays. He's a German guy. He's won 2 Oscars and 4 Grammys and has been nominated for two Emmy Awards and a Tony Award. So this guy is certainly very talented. The music for this film, it's not like one of my favorite scores of all time, especially not of any superhero film, but I was paying attention more to the music for this film, and I was pretty pleasantly surprised. A lot of it's pretty high octane and pretty emotional when it needs to be. It fits the action scenes, it fits the emotional moments. But overall, there's a lot of good techno and synth music throughout this, but there's also some good orchestral and symphonic music. So it is pretty varied, and it's pretty well composed score. Nothing uber special by any means, but it was definitely an improvement over the last film. Pro number 6 is the special effects. CGI galore with this movie, but it all is very, very good. This adds to the slow-mo shots, which are mostly CGI. This adds to the colors, which of course are all CGI, but the special effects are great. All of the CGI shots are well animated, they're well done, they're well detailed, they look great. It's an improvement over the last movie. Not to say that the last movie was bad, but the effects are certainly a big improvement. They look great. Probably the best CGI effects that the Spider-Man series has had thus far. Honestly, I might even say that they're the best CG effects of the entire Spider-Man franchise. Big words, especially since I haven't seen the last 2 MCU films, but thus far, I actually think this movie has the best looking special effects. That's probably the highest praise that I will ever give this movie, surprisingly. And the last pro is that there's some decent action scenes. The first opening chase when Spider-Man is chasing down, what's the guy's name? Alexei Sistovich. When he's chasing him down in the opening scene, that's a really fun action scene. It's also a bit goofy and a bit funny. Then there's that montage with Spider-Man going around fighting crime and saving people. That's fun. Then there's Spider-Man's fight with Electro in Times Square. That's fairly entertaining. And then there's a lot of the third act, which is mostly action, with Spider-Man and Gwen versus Electro, and then kind of Spider-Man versus Green Goblin. Spider-Man's final fight with Electro is pretty entertaining. Though I have one serious problem with it, it is still a lot of fun. The CGI looks great. There's lots of really good slow-mo shots. There's lots of bright, pretty colors. The music is also really good too. Overall, the last action scene is pretty good, and for the most part, the action scenes in this film are entertaining, despite the fact that I have one major issue with the action scenes in this film. And that's all she wrote for prose. That's all I have to say for prose, too. Let's get into my cons, because holy fuck do I have a lot of them. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cons for this movie. They all kind of have to, well, not a lot of them have to do with each other. I'll talk about this one. My main con number one, my main problem with all the action scenes is the severe lack of hand-to-hand combat. It's very blatant in this movie. Spider-Man barely even does his swinging drop kick in this film. Spider-Man almost exclusively relies on his agility and his webs to fight his foes. It's lame. It's very disappointing, and it's very frustrating when Spider-Man could solve a lot of his problems with his foes if he started getting more physical in hand-to-hand combat, but he just relies on his webs to fight his foes left and right. It kind of makes this movie feel really tame, too. Like, if somebody was to say that this is the closest thing to an adaptation of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, I'd believe them, because Spider-Man barely punches people in that show, too. The same case goes for Spider-Man in this movie. It's maddening. Con number 2 is Peter Parker. When he is fighting his foes and he's fighting crime and when he's being Spider-Man, Peter Parker's fine. But for the rest of this movie, Peter Parker is so frustrating in this film. He's such a overly melodramatic, pansy teenager in this movie, even though he's not a teenager. He's 20 years old at this point, but he acts like such a fucking teenager in this movie. It's not even funny. His character is boring. His chemistry with the rest of the cast is forced and cringy. His dialogue is painful and overly dramatic and still cringy. Hold up. I will watch that. My wife is very unhappy that there is a Winnie the Pooh horror movie coming out at some point, because she's a big Winnie the Pooh fan. And I'm going to watch the fuck out of it. Yeah, overall, fucking Peter Parker is an overly dramatic bitch in this movie. When he's Spider-Man, he's tolerable, but when it's just Peter, God, is he just a pansy. Con number 3 is Harry Osborn. My God. He sucks. Take the version of Harry from Spider-Man 2 and put it in this movie. Make him younger and make him act more like a whiny trust fund bitch brat. Holy fuck, is Harry bad in this movie. He's annoying. He's whiny. He's obnoxious. He's bitchy. He's cringy. He's just a spoiled, rotten brat in this film. And fuck me, is he painful to watch. The actor is miscast. His acting is bad and over the top and ridiculous. His dialogue is cringy and terrible. Not even talking about him as Green Goblin, but God, Harry sucks in this movie. He's just bad and pointless and miscast and terrible. Con number 4 is Electro. I like Jamie Foxx. Jamie Foxx is a good actor. He's been in really good movies before, like Django Unchained. I can't remember the name of that movie, but it was a Netflix superpower movie. He was good in that. He was good in A Law-Abiding Citizen. His character sucks. Like, you hate his character, but Jamie Foxx played that character very well. He probably would do very good as Spawn, because apparently he's trying to get cast as Spawn. But as Electro, he's miscast. And I'm not just saying that because he's black. No, that's not it at all. His character is completely different from how he was in the comics. In the comics, he was an electrical engineer, but he was more respected than he was in this movie. Here, he's a cringy Spider-Man fanboy, invisible nobody who's a complete pushover. Kind of like the Riddler from Batman Forever. He's such a huge Batman fan that he idolizes his character, and he is like, Spider-Man said he needs me. Spider-Man's my friend. We met for 2 seconds on the side of the street because he saved me, and we're best friends. What? But my main issue with Electro, oh, it's raining, is his design. Why is he glowing blue? Why is his voice synthesized to sound staticky and electric? Why is he bald? Why is he glowing blue? Just why? Electro looks terrible in this movie. Not even remotely comic accurate. His dialogue is bad. Don't you know I'm Electro? This is a shocking entrance. What an electrifying performance. It's almost Batman and Robin levels of puns. And he's not really, well, I mean, he's kind of intimidating because he does kill some people in this movie, but he has no presence. He just feels like a one-off villain. Whoop-de-doo. They make him out to be scarier and more intimidating than he is, but he's just really not. His dialogue's cringy. His acting is bad. And I'm just sorry. Jamie Foxx is miscast. I'm sorry. Great actor, but not the right role for this guy. Okay, now we're gonna get into some really heavy hitters. Con number 5 is Green Goblin is more shoehorned into this movie than Venom in Spider-Man 3, for one. 2, Harry Osborn does not work as Green Goblin whatsoever. 3, his fight with Spider-Man is short, lame, and rushed. But 4, the design for Green Goblin in this movie is just hideous. Absolutely hideous. He looks like a incomplete wannabe Iron Man knockoff. His suit of armor is not complete. His glider is ugly. His makeup and design is hideous. Green Goblin is terrible in this movie. Completely miscast, very annoying, very non-threatening. too overly goofy, and the actor looks like he's trying way too hard to look scary. He comes off instead looking just really goofy. So I can't really take him seriously. Green Goblin is awful in this movie. Absolutely awful. These next three cons kind of have to do with each other. Con number 6, there are way too many sequel teases in this movie. A lot of people like to talk shit about Batman versus Superman. Like people saying its biggest flaw is that there's so much world building in the movie, aka so many scenes where the movie stops and dedicates itself to teasing a next movie. That movie is guilty of doing that, there's no doubt. And that is one of the movie's biggest flaws. But still, well, for one thing, it helps that Batman versus Superman has a longer runtime, so it can pace itself out and still tell its own story. With this movie, there's so many scenes that feel like setups for a future installment in this series. When Peter discovers his father's secret lab, that feels to me like they're setting that up to be Spider-Man's secret headquarters in a future movie. When Harry goes to find the spider venom, when they go deep into Oscorp and they find that spider venom, there's a shot where you can see Dr. Octopus's tentacles. And at the end of the movie, there's a shot where not only can you see Dr. Octopus's tentacles, you see the Rhino suit, and you also see the Vulture's wings. And this goes into my next con. The sequel bait ending ends with Spider-Man jumping towards the Rhino. Rhino fired. Well, Rhino in this movie, first of all, is terrible. It's not a guy in a artificial like rhino skin suit that makes him look like a version of the Gray Hulk with horns. It's a mech suit with onboard machine guns and missile launchers. But he fires a few missiles at Spider-Man. Spider-Man webs up a manhole cover, deflects the 2 missiles, and swings it into the Rhino's head. Cut to black, roll credits. It's infuriating and maddening and makes the ending to Terminator Genesis and The Predator from 2018 look tame. Because at least those movies wrap up their current stories. This movie's story still feels incomplete and unfinished. But the main issue is all the sequel teases. There's a lot of scenes in this movie that are so blatantly obvious the studio was throwing in these little scenes to say, hey, look at this. This is coming in a future movie. Hey, look at this. This is coming in a future movie. Hey, look at these little Easter eggs here. This is coming in a future movie. It's maddening. And this leads into my next con, which I lost track. Con number 8 is that this movie is overly ambitious. This movie is trying way too hard to set up its own. It's kind of like The Mummy 2017. It's trying so hard to set up a future franchise that it forgets that it's trying to tell its own story and is then dedicated to just setting up future installments because it wants to compete with the MCU. Because Sony is trying so hard to set up their own cinematic universe to compete with the MCU. It's another studio trying so badly to copy Marvel and try to compete with them and get a piece of that multiverse pie. It's not going to work, guys. Rome wasn't built in a day. Stop taking franchises and trying to make them compete with the MCU. What works for them doesn't work for everybody else. What you guys try to do is probably not the same as what the MCU does. But another issue with this is that it feels so rushed. Because this only came out 2 years after the first Amazing Spider-Man, this movie feels like it's buying into its popularity way too much, kind of like becoming Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and 5. But because it's trying so hard to rush out a sequel and give us a whole bunch of sequel teases and is trying so hard to set up a franchise, it doesn't really feel like a complete film. It feels like half of a script along with a bunch of cliff notes saying, set this up for a movie, set this up for a movie, set this up for a movie, and set this up for a movie. It's maddening. All this world building and all this build up and all of these teases, they get you excited because they look cool. And admittedly, like what this movie was trying to set up with The Amazing Spider-Man 3, The Amazing Spider-Man 4, Spider-Man versus The Amazing Spider-Man, Venom and Carnage, The Amazing Spider-Man Sinister Six Part 1 and 2, all those movies sound really cool. But because Sony deemed $709 million against a $293 million budget to be a financial failure, all this buildup now amounts to nothing. And it's maddening. I can only guess that maybe Sony was hoping that this movie would break $1 billion. That's my only estimate, but $709 million is not a financial disappointment, at least as far as I'm concerned. It's $709 million that you had beforehand. Maddening. So yep, all those have to do with each other. Now comes my, honestly, well, no, those are probably the biggest flaws objectively with this movie, but some of my biggest issues. Con number 9 is that this movie feels like it's got Sinister 2 syndrome. On one hand, you have Spider-Man. Oh, wait, that's another problem, too. Real quick, going back to all the sequel teases. Well, not really, but what is up with this series connecting all of Spider-Man's villains to Oscorp? That wasn't the case in the original comics. Some Spider-Man villains outside of the Goblins have ties to Oscorp. I think Scorpion does. And I think maybe the Rhino does too. I do know that a couple other Jack-o'-lantern too. I'm pretty sure at least. I do know that some Spider-Man villains outside of like the Hobgoblin or Green Goblin or New Goblin have ties to Oscorp. But why does this series have to have every single Spider-Man villain have some kind of tie to Oscorp? That's something I don't like in the MCU Spider-Man movies as well, at least the first two. Every Spider-Man villain has to have some kind of tie to Stark Industries. Why can't they just be their own thing? Same with these things. Why can't the Amazing Spider-Man villains be their own thing, not tied to Oscorp? Just feels a bit forced. But yeah, this movie, I think, has Sinister 2 syndrome. And the fact that on one hand, you have a legit superhero movie where Spider-Man is fighting Electro and is about to fight the Green Goblin, forced at the last 10 minutes of the movie. By the way, their fight is terrible. It's short and just bad. But anyway, but then What the movie actually, I feel like this movie, honestly, it has Sinister 2 syndrome worse because it feels like there's 3 movies in this film. You have 1, which is a Spider-Man sequel. You have 2, which is an entire setup movie for future Spider-Man installments, as well as Spider-Man investigating the death of his parents, which of course also has to have ties to Oscorp, making it feel even more forced. Um, and also kind of making Peter feel like he was somehow destined to become Spider-Man, which feels a bit forced and stupid. And then you have the third aspect of this movie, which is a boring ass melodramatic soap opera about Peter Parker agonizing over the death of George Stacy and agonizing over his urge to bone Gwen Stacy. It's boring, it's forced, it's cringy, it's overly dramatic, and it feels like a fucking soap opera. I don't want to watch this bullshit. I just want to watch Spider-Man fight crime and be badass. This movie has some of that, but when it focuses hard on Spider-Man and Gwen agonizing over whether or not they want to be together, man, does it bring the pace to a screeching halt. Spider-Man 3 threw a lot of crap on screen because it had so much ambition that it wanted to accomplish. But it does a way better job at juggling all these different plot points. With this, and it still keeps the pace moving. With this, it has so much shit that it wants to do, and when it focuses hard on the melodramatic aspect, it's boring, and it brings the pace to a complete screeching halt. Con number 10. Notice in my first Amazing Spider-Man movie review, I didn't really mention Gwen Stacy. That's because she dies in this movie, and I've never been a big fan of Gwen Stacy. I even like Mary Jane Watson. Like, discounting the first 3 movies, Spider-Man's had a lot of girlfriends over the years. My favorite's always been Black Cat, which, by the way, that's who I was referring to earlier today. Felicity Jones, who played Jyn Erso in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, plays Felicia Hardy, Black Cat, in this movie. That's another aspect of this movie that feels like a future setup for a sequel. Is that it feels like, oh, hey, let's introduce Black Cat possibly in her human form. So maybe in the next movie, she could be Peter's next girlfriend, which I would have liked to see because Black Cat's actually my favorite of all of Peter Parker's girlfriends. But, yeah, she dies. And Gwen Stacy has always been my least favorite of Spider-Man's girlfriends. Their relationship is very ill-fated. But watching these two agonize about wanting to be together all throughout the movie, it feels like a boring teenage melodrama. It's boring, it's dull, it's tedious, it's cringy, it's poorly written, and it sticks out like a sore thumb. It leaves you wishing, what is this doing here? Why can't these two just bone? Not to be crude, but why can't these two just be together? Because that's actually one thing that I applaud Mary Jane for doing at the end of Spider-Man 2. She acknowledges that, yeah, it'll be a risk if you and I are together because people may come after me because you're Spider-Man. I'm okay with that. I'm willing to deal with that because I choose to be with you. That is established in this movie, but it's right before Gwen dies. that she says something along the lines of, I choose to help you and I choose to be with you. It's my choice. But it's too little too late because not even 10 minutes later, she dies. Now, I will say, I didn't really say this in my first review. I will say Emma Stone does a decent job playing the character, but I've just never been a fan of the Gwen Stacy character. She's always been my least favorite of Spider-Man's girlfriends. And just watching Spider-Man and Gwen agonize constantly and be all, I made a promise to your dad, but I want to be with you, but I want to keep you safe, but I miss you so much. I stalk you every single day because it's the only way that I get to be close to you as Spider-Man. What is this shit? A superhero fucking soap opera? I don't want to watch this. This is boring. And my final con with this film, con number 11, this movie's depressing. Watching Harry slowly die throughout this movie is not fun. Watching Peter and Gwen break up, because when the two are working together, like when they're working together to fix Spider-Man's web shooters, when they're working together to try to defeat Electro, their chemistry is pretty strong and their camaraderie is pretty strong. And when they actually are being lovey-dovey and saying and being a good couple, I almost do buy them as being a good couple, but the moments are too few and far between. But watching these two break up, it's not fun. And watching Spider-Man fail to save Gwen Stacy at the end is depressing as fuck. And the last 10 minutes of this movie is Peter Parker wallowing in his sorrows, being miserable, just being all whoa. I mean, I get that he's sad and he's devastated and depressed over the death of the love of his life. But it's a bit overly dramatic, but it's just not fun. It's sad, it's depressing, it's a kind of mean-spirited, and it's just not fun. It's depressing as fuck. I don't want to watch this shit. And I am aware that the ending of No Way Home kind of redeems this movie's ending. The thing is, I don't care because I will never watch that movie, so I don't care. Oh, and back to the ending. Watching Peter wallow in his sorrows, it's depressing, and it also goes on way too long. The last 5 minutes would have been okay, but the last 10 to 12 minutes of this movie is just Peter Parker being all woe is me and wallowing in his sorrows. It's not fun. And then it leads into the most painful super sequel bait ending that I've ever seen in any film in my entire life. Whew. Jesus, tap dancing Christ, that was a fucking thing. Overall, final thoughts. This movie sucks. There were some things here that showed some promise, and there are a couple entertaining aspects to this movie, but god damn, is this one of the most imbalanced, ill-conceived, ill-fated superhero movies that I've ever seen in my entire life. Had they at least made a third movie, I wouldn't be so harsh on this. I would just say this is easily the weakest of the series, and I would just move on. But because this movie is such a massive stepping stones movie, knowing all that was to come later afterwards, watching this movie is like a gigantic bait and switch. Hey guys, look at all this shit that's gonna come in the next franchise. Nope, got canceled. $709 million is a financial disappointment. Fuck you. Rating, well, before that, I will still say this is not one of the worst superhero films I've ever seen, but it's probably one of the most frustrating, and it's definitely one of the most disappointing. I hate to say that because Spider-Man is one of my all-time favorite superheroes, but god damn was this movie not very good. Final rating. I'm going to give The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a 3.5 out of 10. Definitively. I really struggled with this movie's rating. I almost gave it a 4, but I felt that was a bit too generous. And I thought 3 was just slightly a bit too low. So I'll give it a 3.5 out of 10. Man, does this movie suck. Not one of the worst superhero movies I've ever seen, but it sucks. God, it sucks. Thankfully, next week, the Spider-Man franchise will be vastly redeemed. So join me next week as I tackle these, probably the first animated movie I've ever reviewed, at least since my deleted Batman reviews, with 2018's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Join me next week for that. And as always, post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. Look forward to next week's video. And as always, go out and if you want to bone somebody who wants to bone you, just bone them. You only get one chance. And I will see you guys in the next video. Fuck me, this was a mouthful.